Well, good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. This thing does go live all around the world. So, wherever you are, thanks so much for joining today. Hey, gang, I'm Jeff DeVerter, Chief Technology Evangelist here at Rackspace Technology. Well, you know that. I come in and talk to you guys all the time. So glad to be back again. We've been doing these on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and I miss talking to you guys on Fridays and Mondays. Maybe we'll add some of that back in. Today's going to be a whole lot of fun. We're going to talk about data, big data, no small data, just big data, but some really interesting things that have been going on in the world with data and how it's being used and how it's becoming so foundational to every aspect of every company. But to kick us off, I thought I'd start maybe with a news article. Researchers over at Texas A&M University, they found another interesting way to use data for the social good. Now, what they've realized is when there is a natural disaster, like a hurricane that comes through an area, or tornadoes, or something that is extraordinarily impacting, well, the government comes in, they do some big stuff to help, people recover. Everybody flees the area. But what they wanted to do was find a way to systematically be able to gauge the recovery of that region back to, I'll use air quotes here, normal life. And so they're using big data to monitor effectively foot traffic as people go in and use grocery stores and pharmacies and things along those lines to actually show when people are back and going about their normal lives. Super interesting article. It was posted over on a government website, the National Science Foundation. Producer Daniel, good old producer Daniel, will post it in the chat. By the way, you guys have been very quiet in the chat this morning. Where are you in the world watching us here this morning? Feel free to comment that down below. And start to be thinking about your data questions, or more specifically for my guest today. Now, I'm really excited to have the guy who leads Rackspace's data practice, and I've been in a ton of different meetings with him, ton of different. Sorry, just a little notification there. Different activities that happen here inside of Rackspace. His name is Nihar Gupta. Now, Nihar is, I called him yesterday, texted him and said, hey, can you join us? We want to talk about big data. So Nihar, why don't you come on in here? I'm not exactly sure if we're live in the world, but I know we're being recorded. Hey, Nihar, welcome to our live session. The first time I've had you on here.
Hey, Jeff, happy to be here.
Hey, so we're talking big data. We talked briefly before about that example that Texas A&M, University of Texas A&M, had used to gauge foot traffic. What are your thoughts about that example?
It's so cool. It's one more, brilliant use case, right, for how companies are or entities, right, government entities are using data and using those insights meaningfully. So, this is another good use case. I just looked at the article myself right after you posted it, and I love it. I mean, it's a great way to understand what's happening after natural disasters, which soon to be increasing in frequency by looking at data and looking at, anonymized cell phone usage and understanding kind of, when those communities can come back up. So I love any, these types of use cases where we found new ways of using data. And that doesn't happen kind of overnight. You have to have the right data infrastructure to be able to go use that data and derive those insights.
That's right. Data nerds, as I like to call folks, have always been excited about what can you learn from the data. But unfortunately, in the past, they're relegated to also being the folks who are usually managing the data or a lot closer to it. And businesses, have not had access to or devoted the time and attention and resources into systematically going through and making data available to be able to ask questions of it. And that's one of the things that I'm so excited about, where the world is today with the use and consumption of data. But to do that kind of brings us to the topic I thought we would visit about today. To bring all that together, you've got to get a data engineering practice and activities in place. So it's a new term, data engineering. Why don't you start by maybe defining what that is and why it is?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it is a newer term. Probably in the last, kind of 10-ish years, it's really gained a lot more steam. And that kind of coincides, right? Highly correlates to when we've had this big data explosion,
Mhm.
and I'd say that's ever since sort of the early teens, around 2010ish, and it's because of the explosion of data, right?
Yeah.
One of the stats that gets quoted quite frequently is 90% of the data ever generated in the world was generated in the last 2 years. That just tells
Mm.
you the kind of exponential rise of data generation. So with that, with all these new types of data and increasing volumes of data that we're seeing in the world, and generated from all kinds of different sources, such as sensors is one of the newer areas, but
Yeah.
application data, log data, all these different forms of data that get generated. It's only as valuable as what you can actually kind of derive from that data, and how kind of meaningful you make it to the point where you can serve up different types of workloads based off of it, right? And so when I say that, I mean you've got all these different types of data. You've got to collect that data. You've got to ingest that data into some kind of central repository, or single source of truth. You've got to be able to transform that data, right? Go through a cleansing process and transforming it, and then really getting it ready for kind of the derivation of insights. So that's sort of the whole sort of supply chain of data, from the source where it gets generated all the way to the consumer. There's a lot of complexity in between, and that's really where companies over the last 10, 15 years have spent a lot more energy, and we're nowhere where close to where we need to be. But I think it's becoming increasingly apparent that companies need to have that right foundation in place, so that they can go derive that value from the data, because that's how they differentiate in the market.
Yeah, and data is becoming used, just even the term and used so much more by people who wouldn't have thought about it before. And I think a great example of the fact that data is now commonplace and the expectation of data is commonplace. And I just thought of it. You mentioned the increased number of sensors. Now, these sensors, they can be all the device, our phones. They could be, the home automation pieces, and even what manufacturers are putting into their products, but even to the point, even in government. I mean, if you've now, I'll admit I haven't read this whole thing, but I know I've skimmed some areas. But in that infrastructure bill that the president has put together and trying to get approved, they're calling out sensors that they want so that they can capture more data, so that they can do more things with it. Now, I don't know how thrilled I am about some of that, but it's in bills now, and
Yeah.
and maybe even becoming law. So very very new world, but it caused now we think about it now in the context of in our businesses, getting that data. There's an expectation that all the data that companies are capturing is available for use. So there's all sorts of storage of that data, the sanitization of the data, the curation of the data, enrichment of the data, all fitting into that data engineering space, so that it's ultimately available for businesses to ask a myriad of questions of the data.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think you're referring to kind of, I think one of the terms that gets used quite a bit, and more so recently, is the democratization of data, right?
There you go.
It's being able to give your employees, different stakeholders, maybe even your customers, access to the data that you're collecting, so that again, ultimately, you enable important stakeholders to be able to derive that value. And so instead of having sort of one small team of BI developers,
Right.
or data scientists that do everything, you're now able to get that data in the hands of more folks. Now, with that, of course, you've got to have the right security controls and the right governance in place, because and especially if you look at certain industries, you got to be very careful about that. But that's the balance. You want to be able to do more with data, but you also want to do it in a controlled way.
Yeah. So, so when we think data engineering and going from just having DBAs who make sure that the SQL or MySQL databases are alive or the data warehouse is happy, what goes into a data engineering practice inside of an organization, so that the data can be accessed by all those folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing more and more kind of focused teams, right, on teams of data engineers,
Hmm.
and so in a lot of cases, the ideal state is being able to use sort of common agile methodologies, using sort of CI/CD practices to really reduce failure rates and get that data to its final destination faster.
Yeah.
Obviously, SQL is technologies are a core part of that, and so you'd expect them to have that kind of SQL sort of experience and expertise as well. But those teams are they've got monitoring set up. They're managing those data flows. They're constantly bringing in new data sources, performing all the ETL, sort of transformations of that data, cataloging that data, right, to make it usable by the end consumer of it. There's a lot that goes into modern data pipelines, and so all of that needs a lot of caring and feeding. And so that's why you see kind of more dedicated teams and functions within organizations that really are there just to kind of ensure that data makes it to its final destination with the least number of failure rates in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, you and I work with our chief data officer Juan Riojas a bunch, and he has a couple of terms that I really like and appreciate. And the first is looking at those pipelines like a supply chain, and treating it with the same level of diligence that you would a literally physical supply chain, because you've got this core asset that you need to treat with such respect. And if ultimately you're getting to a point of making key business decisions on a moment by moment basis, or taking it to the next level and building analytic engines or machine learning models that are going to help make predictive decisions about it, then the purity of that data really has to be intact.
Yeah, I love the supply chain analogy, and it's one that I use frequently, kind of in my conversations with customers as well. Data is an asset, like you said. Data is really a raw material, right? When it
Mhm.
first gets produced, in its natural state, it might just be some sort of unstructured data, right? Unstructured data set that in and of itself doesn't have any value. It's not until you do all the mutations and transformations and combinations and aggregations and perform all of those activities in the data pipeline to where you can actually where it actually has value. So in and of itself, it's a raw material, but you have to go then put it through that supply chain to really be able to get what you need from it.
So I think and it's the first time I've heard you use the term considering it a natural resource. And I think that's a perfect analogy, because I think a lot of business leaders will say, look, hey, I've already spent all this money on all these SQL servers, or I've got all of this stuff getting thrown into an S3 bucket somewhere. And that's all great and it's well and good, but it's like the tree, the trees that we need that have great value in becoming a piece of paper or a lump or some lumber, a lumber here, that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
but it takes work and it takes effort, and those those gigabytes or petabytes upon petabytes of data that you've got stored needs to be curated before it really has great value.
Yep, totally. And this has become a more important initiative for kind of company boards and CEOs and chief data officers. You're seeing more chief data officers
Yeah.
as a role. It becomes a very important initiative. It requires investment, right? But it has to, if it gets that right level of sponsorship at the right, at the executive level, I think that's when you really start to see the change, because you have to invest in that infrastructure. You have to
Yeah.
recognize first the value of the data and be willing to invest in it. And so I think you're seeing a lot more of that, especially in the modern era of digital transformation, right? Over the last several years, it's just really accelerated more of a focus on that data.
Yeah, I've actually started to use the term. A little while back, I really got back into using the term digital transformation, even though the marketers have beaten all sense out of it, and we're so numb to it. But I really feel like, especially this year, we're finally at a point where companies can really truly go through digital transformation. But when I present about this, and in my role, I get to, I do a lot of these sorts of things where I talk to the world, or I'm talking to our customers, or I'm talking to people interested in becoming our customers. And when I talk about digital transformation, I more refer to it now as digital disruption, because it is disrupting every aspect of organizations. Now, disrupting it in a good way, because it's helping unlock new markets, new customers for them. In fact, I was talking to a partner company yesterday, And he was saying, look, it's even happening not just in these huge companies, but even in some of the smallest companies. And he was giving an example of a little, I'll call it a mom and pop restaurant. Some immigrants. It was a Thai-based restaurant, and when COVID happened, of course, this is the type of a business you think might go under when people are locked in their homes, but they're actually seeing 3 times the amount of sales through takeaway sales that they're going now, and they're actually even saying they may never open to dine in again because they're just making a ton more money just selling out to people who can come and pick it up, or Uber Eats or whatever delivery service
Right.
might do it. But it begs the question also, what other examples maybe come to your mind where people have made those investments in their chief data officer and their data engineering practice, and they've unlocked opportunity, whether it's, now they're selling a new product or they found a way to monetize their data. We hear a lot of promises of monetizing data, but what are
Yeah.
some examples of people who've actually seen it? You don't have to give customer names, but
Yeah, yeah,
what are
no, of
some?
course. I'm happy to share. First off, I mean, just the premise of what you just said, it's so true. Like, every company is a data company,
Yep.
and if you're not disrupting with data, then you will be disrupted.
Yes.
You're seeing it in across every single industry. I guess one example that of a customer that I've been working with and the team has been working with. I won't mention the name, but they're a major kind of paint manufacturer that you
Mhm.
all are familiar with. And during the pandemic, they saw incredible increase in demand for their product. And you think about it, what were folks doing during the pandemic? Well, they're staying more at home, right?
Yep.
And it's an opportunity to do a lot of home improvement projects. And so the demand for their paint went up incredibly during that period, and they weren't ready for it. Their supply chain wasn't ready for it, and this is an uncommon story for what happened during the pandemic in terms of demand patterns completely changing. And so they needed, they recognized they needed to have a better understanding for what those demand patterns were saying, and better signals, right, of to inform their production capacity. And so we've set up an entire sort of data infrastructure for them and architecture for them. They went from having a couple sort of databases with a basic visualization layer and very sort of basic insights off of that to really standing up a full-fledged sort of cloud architecture with streaming data coming into that platform, being able to derive kind of real-time insights on related to demand, and now kind of the next iteration is going to be getting into machine learning and really starting to understand, like, what is that data, what can we start predicting, instead of being reactive, what can we start being proactive and predictive with understanding kind of what's happening in the market. So it's just
Right.
an example, and that's one of many examples in different industries of companies recognizing why digital transformation and transforming their data estate is so critical right now.
Yeah, great example. And what an interesting position to be in, where you've got this demand for your product, which is off the charts of what you'd expected, and it's hard to get people to come in because, well, a lot were sick, or they're
Yep.
just locked in their homes or whatnot. So super interesting. Well, Nahar, we're coming up on the end of our time here. I am aware we've had some LinkedIn issues, but we will get this posted to LinkedIn. Sorry we didn't have your engagement in this, but Nahar, if you're up for it, we'll come back and continue this data engineering conversation, because I think we've just scratched the surface.
Let's do it. There's so much to unpack here. I agree.
Awesome. All right. Hey, everyone, have a great day. And we'll be back tomorrow on LinkedIn Live and across all the socials, I think around 12:30 Central Time, US. So we'll talk to you then. Have a